Hey everyone, today we're gonna do our flourless chocolate brownie. This is a recipe that we use all the time. We absolutely love it, and it's super easy to make. So let's get going. First thing we're gonna do is we're going to melt our chocolate, our honey, and our butter. We're gonna do it on really low heat to make sure that we don't burn the ingredients. All right, while this is melting, we're gonna preheat our oven to 250 degrees. This recipe needs to be done very, very low heat in the oven. It's kind of like a souffle. It's going to rise, it's going to set really, really nicely when it comes out of the oven, but if you have it at too high of a heat, the eggs are gonna curdle. Next, we're gonna separate some eggs. I'm doing a double batch here. So if you're following along at home, you'll only need 10. So you're gonna add the eggs. I'm gonna whip them on speed 7. We're gonna whip these eggs for about 7 minutes. With the sugar. All right, now you can see that all the butter is pretty much melted. This chocolate looks absolutely delicious. I could probably just drink this. You wanna make sure that there's no clumps of butter. Little bits of butter like this are gonna make your brownie streaky. So we're just gonna give it another second. You can see how beautiful this mixture is. Eggs and sugar have incorporated nicely. It's become really nice and fluffy and light. That's exactly what we're looking for. We're just going to put it into our bowl here. Now I'm slowly going to fold in this chocolate. It's okay if the mixture deflates just a little bit. That's gonna happen. Don't be scared. It's gonna be fantastic. The eggs are what's gonna help this leaven in the oven. Even though this mixture is hot, you don't need to worry too much because the sugar in the eggs protects them from curdling. We still wanna add it slowly, but it's pretty safe. And I'm just slowly going to incorporate this. And we're just gonna fold it until it becomes a nice, homogeneous mixture. You can see there's no streaks. It's a nice dark brown. This takes a while. It might take about 5-10 minutes of gentle folding, but that extra time gives you a much better product in the end. So we take our pan. I've got a piece of parchment paper in there. That's just gonna make it much easier to get out after it's done baking. And then we are just gently gonna pour. You can pour it right into the middle. It'll spread itself out. It's ready for the oven. Now it's gonna bake for an hour and a half at 250 degrees. So get ready for your house to smell. Your neighbors might be knocking on the door pretty quick to figure out what you're baking. But I'm gonna fire this in the oven and then we'll see how it comes out. So just taking it out of the oven. It's perfectly cooked. We did the toothpick test. It came out clean. And you'll notice that it falls a little bit in the center, and that's okay. I'm gonna let it set in the fridge 12 hours, maybe 24 hours overnight. Then I'll take it out of the pan. I'll trim this off, and these little imperfections become chef's snacks. And the last step is just to let it set in the fridge, portion it, and serve it with a bit of your favorite gelato.
I'm going to teach you a little bit of finesse with cooking mussels today, because for me, in my opinion, a mussel that's fully opened is delicious and very nice, but the secret is a mussel that's just opened is like, it's pure nectar and flavor, and it's something that I take a lot of pride in cooking. If you go to have a meal in any restaurant I've worked in, you'll always see mussels on the menu, and they're there to stay. We're going to do baked mussels, and we're going to do steamed mussels. We're going to start with baked. It's one of my favorite snacks ever, especially for special occasions when companies coming over. It's an amazing snack. I don't think you see it in restaurants enough. I think the reason why is it actually is to do very simply for a few people is very easy, but to do it for 300 people is very, very labor intensive and time consuming. So we're going to do it on a small scale today, and it's super delicious. It's essentially steamed mussels taken out of their shell. We're going to make a compound butter, put that on top of the mussel, and then we're going to broil it, and we're going to serve it with bread. So the first step is for presentation and for cleanliness and everything. We're going to clean the mussels. So this one is very nice already, but you can see in comparison that sometimes mussels are not super pretty. They have all these little sea growth on them. And most of them have what we call beards, which is right here. And it grows out of the mussel, and all you have to do is pull on it a little bit and pull up and take it off. And then we just scrape the mussel clean. You can use even a green scrubby pad at home. I use an oyster shucker or a paring knife, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but you just want to get some of that just like sea garbage off of them. For me, one of my favorite tasks to do as a young cook. I always liked cleaning mussels. It was like always hot in the summertime, and you had a nice cold tap running over your hands, and it teaches you how to pay attention to little details. A lot of places, you order mussels in a lot of restaurants, and you don't realize that somebody is, you got 100 mussels in your bowl, and you don't realize that someone's actually hand scrubbed each and every one of those. Mussels also, I recommend cooking them as soon as you get them. I treat them mussels are alive, so we treat them as such. So if you're in a restaurant, you bathe them 2 or 3 times a day, you re-ice them twice a day, especially once you start to clean them. You also want to look out for cracked shells. This is very important. So as you go through each mussel, you'll see something like this from time to time where a mussel's been crushed. If a mussel has a crack in the shell, don't serve it. If the mussel's been broken and the meat is exposed, just throw it in the garbage. What you're looking for is mussels that are completely closed. Mussels don't really have an expiry date. As long as they're closed, they're good to go. You have to go through every single mussel that you receive and make sure they're good to sell. A lot of people say that they don't like seafood. It's because when they've ordered seafood, it hasn't been taken care of properly. So the first thing I teach my cooks when we serve mussels is exactly how to take care of them. And we just treat them like little babies. We just take care of them, we bathe them, we wash them. So our mussels are put aside, ready to be served. The next step that we're going to do is make the compound butter. Compound butter is very classical, traditional French-style stuffed mussels. We're going to take some tomatoes, and we're going to do something that's called concassé. We take the end of the tomato, and we cut a little X at the tip, just piercing the skin. And we have a boiling pot of water, and we're just going to peel the outside of the tomato off, and then we're going to take the insides of the tomato out, and then we're going to blitz this fresh, the flesh of the tomato into our compound butter for a little bit of chunk and fresh flavor. So we have our little X cut at the tip, and we're just going to drop it into the boiling water for about 20 or so seconds. You'll see the peel start to come off the tip where you've cut the X, and that's when you know it's time to put into cold ice water. While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to put a generous amount of butter. Room temperature, very important, room temperature, into the food processor. Now, if you don't have a food processor, you can also take very soft butter, and you can do this all in a bowl with a spatula or a whisk, and you can just mix the butter up yourself that way, and it's perfectly fine. Okay, our tomatoes are starting to peel now. We're going to put them in the ice water. Stop the cooking. And then we're just going to take the edge of our knife, and you can see the peel comes right off of the tomato. And the tomato flesh is still uncooked and raw, and the peel is coming right off. If you have a dehydrator, you can also save these peels and put them on the dehydrator overnight, and in the morning you'll have really nice like tomato peel chips that you can actually use for a garnish on soup or something like that as well. And then we just cut the inside out. We put that to the side, and we take the seeds out, and all that's left is just the flesh of the tomato. We're going to just small chop the tomato flesh. We have soft butter, tomato paste, fresh chopped tomato, breadcrumbs, Parmesan cheese, and fresh herbs, and a lot of salt and pepper, and some lemon zest, and a little bit of lemon juice. We're going to bake it in the oven at about 450 degrees, only for about 6 minutes. Or if you're at home, you just put your oven on broil and broil it for a minute. So you just get some color on the top, and then all the butter melts, and you get some crispiness on top of the mussel, and then you're dipping your bread in all the melted butter in the pan at the end. I would recommend serving this dish with a nice cold beer. I think this pairs better with beer than it does with wine. We have some lemon zest for freshness. A little bit of lemon juice. And now we're going to reserve our tomatoes, and we're going to quickly blend this up in the food processor. As you can see here, it's super soft, really airy. It smells like garlic and lemon and all sorts of good flavors here, and it's going to be perfect for us when we start to assemble our dish here. Before we start cooking the mussels, we're going to add a very finely chopped shallot to the butter, because what we still want is some texture and crunch in there. So we're going to finely chop the shallot. We do that by cutting the shallot in half, leaving the root attached, and we're cutting lines down it and not into the root, just at the front of the root of the shallot. And then we're going to cut across 2 lines as well, again keeping the shallot in one piece. And then we just go up and down as close together as possible. If you don't have a shallot, you can also use some finely chopped onion. And then we're just going to fold this into the butter for some texture. Next, we're going to cook the mussels. In this particular case, we're going to steam them in a bit of wine. You can use any kind of alcohol, really, but wine is the best because it's not going to ignite too much. So we're going to just start with a cold pan. Turn it on high heat. It's very simple. We're just going to put our mussels in, and we're going to pour our wine into the pan. And then all we do is just put a lid on it. Now what we want to do is wait for the wine to start boiling and steaming inside the pot. Then all of a sudden you're going to see the mussels, when they start cooking, all these bubbles are going to rise up to the pot. What we're looking for is that to happen twice. So the bubble's going to come up, we lift up the pan and check, the bubbles go all the way down, we put the lid on, then it comes up again, then the mussels should be just perfectly opened up. Okay, so as you can see here, the bubbles are starting to happen. Once the steam starts coming out, we're going to lift up the pot, and there we go. Our bubbles are up, our mussels are just starting to open. You can kind of shake them a little bit, It really smells like the sea in here right now. If any mussels aren't opening, what you can do is just tap their shells. And then, like this one here, wake up. And then, if you tap them, it usually makes them open up. If by the time all the other mussels are cooked and the one or two that haven't opened are still closed, don't serve them, just throw them out. Like this one, I'm just gonna throw it out because it might not be good anymore. Okay, so here we go. All right, these mussels are perfectly cooked. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna take the mussels out of the shell. You can see that they're perfectly cooked. They're nice and pale still, which is what you want. They're not shriveled up. They're super, super plump and juicy. And that's because we've been really, really careful at monitoring how fast they're cooking. It doesn't take long, less than a minute usually. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the shell, break it in half. You can actually use the shell to take the mussel off because there's just a little inductor muscle that attaches the mussel to the shell. So what we're gonna do is just detach that and place it back in the shell like this. And place it in a pan. Okay, now we're gonna assemble the mussels. So we have them here in our pan. We're gonna take our nice compound butter, make sure it's all mixed in with the mussel nectar from the pot. I'm actually looking at it now. I'm gonna add a few more breadcrumbs because the breadcrumbs are what's gonna really give it some nice crunch. So we just fill the shell up, just like this, and we place them in the pan. So now we're ready to put it in the oven. So we have our oven set to broil, and we have our nice pan of mussels here, and we're gonna put it in the oven. Oh my God. Oh, it smells really, really good. Okay, now for the best part, it's time to plate. So we have some fresh bread. You can also just serve it in the pan, which is really nice to do as well. Oh, it smells tomatoey. It smells salty. It smells like the sea. It's lots of fresh herbs, lots of dill, lots of basil coming out in the aroma. And we just take all of this melted butter and goodness here. And then we finish with just my favorite, just a little bit of olive oil for some shine. And if it needs, just a touch of sea salt. And that's the dish. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Alex Lavroff. I'm going to be teaching you guys how to make one of my favorite dishes, Spanish prawns. It's a one-pan wonder. You can make this in like 10 minutes and blow everybody's mind. It's just like pure flavor. The first thing that we have here, if you want to take a look, is our jumbo prawns. You can also use any type of prawn. I just think these are a little bit more fun for this dish because I like to keep the shell on because it's going to give you a little more of a flavor boost at the very end from the shells roasting in the oven. The first thing we're going to do, not only for presentation but also to devein the prawns, is we're going to split the shell down the back on all the prawns. And then we're just going to take our knife and we're going to cut a little bit into the prawn all the way down. And you can see here that there's it's called the vein. It's just a part of the prawn that you don't want to eat. It's actually really, it's prawn poo, let's be real. But we're going to take that out so nobody has to eat it. And you just take the tip of your knife, and you just take it out into a little bowl of water. And then you have a nice clean prawn right there. What you're going to need, and what's great about this dish is you can add or subtract these things. This is what I'm using that we have available to us here. I have almonds, butter, canned tomato, garlic, shallot, jalapeno, and tomato. For this dish, I like to keep the shallots very rough chop. So we just split the shallot in half with the peel on. And we just yank the peel off, just like that. We just put our shallot down, we keep the root on, take a very sharp knife, and we're just going to sliver the shallot down like this. For this dish, it's all about being very rustic, so it doesn't need to be fancy or fine, just nice and thin. The garlic, usually I like to finely chop garlic as well. For this dish, I like it slivered and let everyone know there's lots of garlic in their dish. So we're going to take 2 cloves of garlic, and we're just going to lay it on its side, and we're just going to sliver the garlic. Okay, the tomato. For the tomato, we're just going to rough chop it. We want it chunky. I'm just going to cut it in half. Take out the green stem. Let's chop it up just like this. You don't need a lot of tomato. It's just again for more flavor. Usually I de-seed the jalapeno, but for this dish, again, to keep it really simple and really easy, we're just going to slice it very thin. Just a few slices. Don't worry about de-seeding it. Don't worry about taking the white out. We're just going to go like this. And then we have a really nice heat flavor for the dish. If you have saffron at home, saffron is also very, very nice in this dish. We are going to use tequila. You can use white wine, you can use champagne. My favorite is Pernod for this dish. You can use pretty much any kind of alcohol you want. The next step is canned tomato. You can use crushed tomatoes, or you can crush them yourself, which is what we're doing. I'm just going to roughly chop this plum tomato here, and we're going to keep lots of the liquid from the can. That's going to be, that's going to be the main part of our sauce. So, low heat. The most important thing is that everything is relatively cold in the pan, and then you're going to finish everything in the oven in one pan together. By the time all the butter's melted and everything's warmed up, the prawns are going to be perfectly cooked. So the first step is we lay our prawns in the pan, again on very, very low heat. And then we're just going to build flavor. So we're going to add our shallots. We're going to add a lot of garlic. And just break it up with your fingers, the slivers. And also, it's almost like you're making a pizza with this dish. Bear in mind of like where you're placing everything, because it's going to come out of the oven like that. We're going to put some fresh chopped tomato. We're going to put some slivers of jalapeno. And we're going to put some almonds. That's going to give it a nice Spanish feel. And the almonds are going to toast in all this heat and butter. When they come out, they'll be nice and brown. Now I'm going to crank the heat up a bit. We're going to put just a little bit of olive oil. Please make sure it's olive oil. We're going to put salt and pepper. Generous amount. So now it's time to turn the heat up in the pan to get everything going. So we're just going to wait till we start hearing a nice amount of sizzle in the pan. The next step, we're going to do a few things fairly quickly. So we have our booze, tequila, we have our crushed tomato, and we have our butter. And we have lemon, okay? All right, first step, this is the fun part. Tequila. So we're going to let that burn off. Don't shake the pan too much, just leave it. It's going to toast all the ingredients. It's going to infuse tons of flavor into the raw prawn. You can already see that everything's starting to sizzle and change color and start to cook. Now that the flame is dying down, we're going to add our crushed tomato. We're going to add fresh lemon juice. And we're going to add a lot of butter. You can also add olives, you can add capers, you can add just about anything else you want to it. Now we're going to take this pan and we're going to put it in the oven for about 7 minutes. Now what we're going to do is we're going to chop a lot of fresh herbs. You can use any mixture with this. For me, I like flat leaf parsley, tarragon, fresh basil, dill, thyme and rosemary are very nice. And we're just going to rough chop it. For me, I like to really see the herbs. I like to taste the herbs. I like the fresh crunch that they have. So I don't chop them too fine. Oh my God. Okay. Oh man, this smells amazing. You can see the butter has just melted. The prawns are cooked perfectly. Everything's nice and roasted, has some color. We're going to add now a lot of fresh herbs to the dish. My favorite part, some more fresh lemon juice. If you have a grill on, you can also grill the lemon and put it on the side and let your guests do it at the table, which is a really nice touch. I think also we're going to finish this with some more olive oil. If you want to cook good, simple, fresh food at home, the most important thing, I think, is to have very high quality vinegar and very high quality oil. Make sure you invest the extra $5 or $6 in a really, really nice bottle of olive oil to finish your bread and finish most of your pastas and dishes with. It makes a really big difference. So we're going to plate this up now. We've got all the jalapenos and the chunky tomato, and we want all this good stuff here to just sort of spoon over the plate. We got the toasted almonds in here, tequila, and we're going to finish with a drizzle of olive oil, a little more fresh pepper. If you have a glass of wine, then the whole evening's saved.
We are making a chocolate beet cake or chocolate beetroot cake, depending on the world where you live. So the first thing you got to do, which is very important, is turn your oven on, get it hot, about 175 degrees or 345 degrees, I think, Fahrenheit. So whatever you prefer, either. So all the ingredients list and recipe is in the link with all the instructions. So go to the link. Okay, so first thing you got to do is get your beets, about 1.5 kilos, and coat them with oil. Get them all, oiled up, and then fire them into the oven. So we've got the beets in the oven. Next thing we need to do is cream the butter and the sugar. So creaming is basically where you combine softened butter and sugar together. I like to use a KitchenAid. The old school way is to do it by hand. You can beat it with a spoon, a wooden spoon, but if you have this type piece of equipment at home, by all means use it to make your life so much easier. So I'm going to beat this for about 3 minutes on medium speed until everything's incorporated. Okay, so after about 2 or 3 minutes, I've got my eggs cracked here into a bowl. We're just going to add them into the mixture one at a time. Find your pan that you're going to be baking in. I'm going to be using a bundt pan for this, and you can use a cupcake tin, you can use a loaf pan, whatever you like, but I like the shape and appearance of a bundt pan, so that's what I'm going to use. And you need to make sure you spray it liberally. Otherwise, your cake will stick to the tin. What I love about the bundt pan is that it does have a bit of a classic appearance, old-fashioned appearance to it. So it's a lot of fun. It's not a shape that you see too often anymore. So once the butter, eggs, and sugars are well combined, I'm going to add the vanilla. And I will just give that a final stir. And make sure you remove as much of the mixture as possible. You don't want to waste any of it. So now I'm going to do the rest by hand. I've got all my dry ingredients and ready to go. So I'm just going to combine them first. I've got my flour here, baking powder, salt, and cocoa. So just make sure the whole mixture, again, is fully combined, that you don't have these streaks of flour in them. Otherwise, it will make your cake a bit streaky. The great thing about this cake is that none of the items are too hard to source, and none of them are highly perishable, like the beets. They can be in your cellar or in your fridge for ages. Okay, so as you can see, there are a lot of clumps of cocoa here, so if that happens to you, it is important that you sift it. So I'm going to add in half the amount of flour first and stir that up. This just helps to get the mixture going. I've added in half of the dry mixture. Now I'm going to add in the sour cream. And then finally fold in the last amount of flour. And get it into the prepared tin. This is looking great. Chocolatey, beety. And if you're worried about baking a cake that's too big, if you don't ice it, it freezes really well too. So if you've been quarantined and you can't have anyone over, this is a good activity to keep yourself occupied. And it'll be a nice little treat for you. You can cut it up and portion it, freeze it, or eat the whole thing in one sitting if you want. So I'm just going to pop this into the oven now. Depending on your oven, it can take anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour to bake. Just need to keep testing it with a skewer to make sure it's cooked. So now I'm going to make the beet icing. This recipe is a lot of fun because it has real beets in it. So I've got all my ingredients here. Again, they're in the link. I've got icing sugar, some of the grated beets still from the beginning, milk, and vanilla. So I'm going to sift the icing sugar first. This helps to remove any lumps so that the icing will be nice and smooth. I also have the softened butter and some cream cheese too. I've got a RoboCube here, but it's basically a food processor. You can also use hand beaters as well. And in the worst case scenario, you can use a whisk and a bowl and just do it by hand. So everything gets put into the bowl. So now we just blend this until we have a nice smooth mixture. Nice. So as you can see, we've got this wonderful bright pink icing that's colored naturally. So I've now, cake's come out of the oven, I've cooled it down. You don't want to ice it when it's warm because the icing's gonna just melt and spill over the sides. So this is cooled down. I'm gonna turn it out of the tin and see how we go. So it's a good idea to use a rack so that the icing can fall through the holes. So this is the tricky part. Well, not really, but it might be for some. And there we go. Cake looks great. Nice color, good crumb. If you like this recipe, we'll be posting recipes like this every day, so please subscribe.
Woo!
Yeah, let's eat this.
Today we're going to make some fresh pasta. Very, very simple. 3 ingredients. Simple, but not easy. Like everything else, it takes a little practice, but we're here to show you how to do it. Flour, salt, and eggs. The general recipe for any pasta dough, if you don't have the recipe in front of you, is very, very easy. For one person, it's 100 grams of flour and 1 egg. That is the general rule. There's variations on the theme, like today, but if you don't have a recipe in front of you, that's the rule of thumb. Here I have all-purpose flour and semolina flour. So we've combined the two, and a pinch of salt. We form a little well in the center, and in that well, we drop our eggs. After you pour the eggs into the well, you start incorporating the flour slowly from the sides. You're also beating the eggs at the same time. You can beat them pre or post. And as you can see, the mixture is getting thicker and thicker. Eventually, your fork will have to be replaced by your hands because it's going to get very sticky, and that's what we want. At this point, I'm going to start using my hands. As you can see, the mixture is getting very, very sticky. So I'll finish incorporating the flour and the egg. So generally, when you're kneading this pasta, I'm going to move this to the board now. They say, when I was doing cooking school, that once you start kneading the pasta, you should be kneading it for about 20 minutes, which is great, but sometimes you don't have that kind of time. So I just like to knead it until I feel like all of the flour has been absorbed, or all of the egg has been absorbed into the flour. Now you might notice that when I'm kneading this pasta, I'm constantly turning it 90 degrees. Fold it onto itself and back out. We're not crushing it, we're not squeezing it, we're just pushing it out. In other words, incorporating everything back into the center, turning it 90 degrees, and continuing that for as long as the pasta needs it. The pasta dough will tell you when it's done. It'll get increasingly hard to knead the dough. So, after much kneading, we get something like this. Now, the key to this is rest. The dough needs to rest after kneading. It helps the gluten to form. It helps the gluten to relax as well. If we were to try to flatten this out or start making our pasta immediately, it would just spring right back. It wouldn't let you do it because it's very, very rigid right now after all that work. The key is to let it rest for at least 1 hour, if not overnight. So we've let the dough rest for about an hour or so. And so you'll notice that it's nice and spongy, not too dry. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into fettuccine. We have here our food processor, which turns into a pasta maker with the proper attachments. When I was a kid, we used to do this by hand in those little handheld crank machines. And my job was to flatten the dough, and then my mom would turn it into fettuccine. And also, my job was to crank the crank. Today, we have technology which allows us to do it a lot quicker. But if you can get your hands on one of those old-fashioned pasta machines that attaches to the table, I recommend that you get one. Specifically, if you have kids in the house, hours of fun, and you're teaching them an incredible life tool. So here we go. Before we can turn this into our desired pasta shape, which today is fettuccine, we have to flatten out the pasta. Essentially, we're making lasagna sheets. Really, it's what they use to make lasagna. There are different settings that we can use for lasagna as far as thinness goes. Today, we're going to go to, because we're making fettuccine, we're going to go to number 6. Now, they're all a little different. This particular one starts at the number 1 and goes up to the number 8. The number 1 being the thickest, and number 8 being the thinnest. Some of them go the opposite way. It's just a matter of getting to know your machine. But we're going to start this guy at number 1, which is the thickest. So I've got this piece. I'm going to turn it on. And we're going to put this guy through. Here we go. And every time you put it up one setting, in other words, we're just thinning this out. At this point, after number 3, you can fold the pasta back onto itself. Essentially, the width of your attachment. You flour it a bit. It's important not to flour it previous to this step, because if you do fold it onto itself, what you don't want is layers of flour. And then what I'll do is I'll put it back through, beginning at number 1 again, but the other way. It'll come on nice and smooth. And here we go to number 2, and I'm going to go one at a time to number 6, which is my desired thickness for fettuccine. I find that number 6 gives it a nice al dente flavor. It's not too thin, but it's also not overly thick where you feel like it's gummy. And here we go. I'm going to cut this one in half, because I don't want my fettuccine to be too long, and try to recreate some sort of Lady and the Tramp scene, and I will flour it. At this point in the process, flour is your best friend. Keeps it from sticking to itself when we divide it up into little fettuccine strands. The worst is putting it through and then have the fettuccine strands stick to each other, and you have to all pull them out by hand. It becomes a little tedious, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. I will change this attachment to the fettuccine attachment here. Turn this back on. And like magic, fettuccine. Throw in a little nest. Put the next one through. Simple as that. So our fettuccine is made, and now we're going to pair it with a beautiful cream sauce called Norcina sauce. Norcina sauce is from an Umbrian village called Norcia. And Norcia is well known around Italy and parts of Europe for its pork products. It is a small hillside town that makes some of the best sausages in the world. Norcina simply means someone from Norcia. So of course, one of the main ingredients, if not the main ingredient of our sauce today, is going to be mild Italian sausage. It could be hot Italian sausage, it could be Tuscan sausage, whatever you like. It can be andouille, it can be anything you like as long as it's not too spicy for you. I like mild Italian sausage because it doesn't overtake the dish. Now, I have taken the liberty of decasing, in other words, removing the sausage from its case. I've got one over here that I'll show you. It's very, very simple. Cut it through and remove its casing. And you dispose of that. You have a hot pan here. I use olive oil. You can use canola if you like. You can use grapeseed oil. I love olive oil. I have to love olive oil because I'm Italian. If I don't, they don't let me back into the country. And we immediately start sizzling the sausage. We're trying to essentially brown the sausage. I'm going to break it up in a moment. Got the rest of our ingredients here. The recipe calls for shallots. If you don't have shallots, feel free to use onions, white onions, red onions. Just keep in mind that shallots, just like garlic, tend to burn in the pan very, very quickly. So you don't want to overcook the shallots. So what I'll do now is wait till this sausage browns. So we're gonna break up the sausage as much as we can because I'd like this to be crumbly. I don't want large pieces of sausage per se. I want it to be as crumbly as possible. And in this hot pan, it really won't take long to cook through. Like my dad always used to say, let the fire do its job. In other words, leave it, let it cook. By mixing it around with a spoon or shaking the pan, you're really impeding the contact of the meat to the pan. We're going to add the onion, shallot, whatever it is that you're using. In the meantime, I'm going to chop up the garlic, and I'll add that as well. Now, a recipe may call for minced garlic, chopped garlic, shaved garlic. I just like to cut mine nice and thin. It gives the plate an added texture. The flavor will always be there, but it just looks nicer in the plate for me, in the sauce. And at this point, I'm also going to add the mushrooms. Now, if you have access to wild mushrooms, great. Porcini, chanterelles, anything like that. Whether they're fresh or even dried. They add such a depth of flavor, an earthy flavor to the sauce. We're using regular cremini, regular white mushrooms, and those are great too. All right, at this point, as this is cooking through, this is the time where we deglaze our pan. It picks up all of the lovely bits that have been left behind at the bottom of the pan, as well as adding some flavor. And you just let it go until the alcohol evaporates. Now that the alcohol is evaporated, I will add the cream. This is heavy cream, 30% or higher. In this case, I believe it's 33%. And once this cream is in, you essentially let the sauce simmer for about 5 or 6 minutes. The cream will reduce slightly. You don't want it to come to a boil per se, but if you can get it to a nice little simmer, it will extract all the flavor from the sausage and the mushrooms, and we're going to have an amazing, amazing sauce that takes minutes to make. Simple and delicious. So now that our Norcina sauce is simmering nicely, we're going to grab the fettuccine we just made, and we're going to pop them in some boiling water that's been pre-salted. How much salt? A very common question. How much salt do I put in the water? You essentially want it to taste like the Mediterranean Ocean. So let's go over to the, let's go do this. So here's our pasta that we've nested. We're going to drop it into some boiling water, and then we're just going to let it cook 3 to 4 minutes at the most, maybe even 2 minutes. It doesn't take very long. Fresh pasta is almost instantaneous. Our pasta is ready. Been about 3 minutes or so. I'm going to drain this. Pasta water, by the way, is your best friend. Don't throw it out. It helps thicken the sauce, any sauce. It helps make the sauce creamier. You'll see once we throw this in how the pasta sauce blends beautifully with the pasta, but also the pasta water, creating this even creamier texture. So I've already put some pepper in the sauce, and then I'm going to plate it, and I'm going to put more pepper on top and some Parmesan cheese. Okay, now we're ready to plate. As mentioned before, copious amounts of pepper. Top it off with some greens. And there you have it.
Hey guys, it's Michael here at Start Fresh Kitchen. Today we're gonna do a really easy focaccia recipe. I know being stuck at home, quarantined, a lot of you are thinking about making bread. This is a recipe we developed here over the last year or so that is super easy and really, really delicious. So I think you're gonna enjoy it. If you appreciate these videos, click the like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what kind of things you would like us to teach you how to cook. You can follow along at home. The recipe is in the link below. It's also on our website, startfreshkitchen.ca. It's literally 6 ingredients, one being water, another one being salt, so it's extremely simple recipe to do. We're gonna start with a little bit of warm water. We wanna make sure that the water is about 100 degrees. 98, 97 is perfect, around the same temperature of your body. Yeast is a living thing, so by giving it that really nice temperature, it allows it to come back to life really easily. So I'm gonna add that to my bowl. I've got some just instant yeast here. I'm gonna add that to it. This yeast is pretty bulletproof, honestly, but I like to put it in the warm water because then you can make sure it's gonna work. As long as you see the little activation happening, it's gonna be a really beautiful dough. So I'll set that aside for a minute. And while it's going, I've got 3 other ingredients. So I like caraway. When I was growing up in New York, there was this bread. It's actually a famous sandwich called beef on weck. And it was a roast beef sandwich on this Kimmelwick bread. So salt and caraway crust, horseradish, and roast beef. It was my favorite thing growing up, so a little bit of my New York roots. I'm gonna add some caraway to this focaccia. I've got some grapeseed oil. You might wonder why I'm using grapeseed instead of olive oil. I like to let my bread rest in the fridge overnight. It makes the most incredibly fluffy, light bread. But olive oil solidifies in the fridge, so it doesn't rise as easily. By using grapeseed oil, we get a beautiful soft dough that you can rest in the fridge. It's perfect. And I'm gonna add a little bit of salt and just stir that up. Once I can see that the yeast is activated, and what I mean by that is there will be little bubbles coming to the top of the water. This is looking perfect. So now I'm going to add the salt, the caraway, and the oil. I'm gonna give it a stir and I'm gonna add half of my flour. The first half of the flour, I'm literally just gonna take a wooden spoon and stir it. So at this point, we're just developing the gluten. All right, now we can take the rest of our flour. You can do this by hand, but we're just gonna use the mixer today to finish kneading. This is gonna take just about 10 minutes. All right, so this dough's looking perfect. So it's a little bit of a sticky dough, and that's a good thing. A wet dough, in my opinion, is a better dough. So it's nice, it's smooth, it's well kneaded. So at this point, I'm just going to take it into my bowl, and I'm gonna wrap this, put it in a warm spot for about an hour until it's doubled in size, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, our bread has risen. Look at that. It's incredibly beautiful. It's doubled in size. It's perfect. It's nice and fluffy. So I'm just going to get these into these beautiful little pans here, a little bit of olive oil. Just gonna take the dough, get it in the pan, then we're gonna work it around. We're gonna deflate it a little bit, that's okay. Just use your fingers, get those good divots in there. Beautiful. Really simple. Take a little extra olive oil, drizzle it on top. Don't be shy with the olive oil. You want to make sure that the olive oil covers all of it. It's going to protect it from drying out during the second rise. So I'm just going to take some cracked pepper, and you can put whatever you want on it. You can add some sliced tomatoes, you can add some cheese. I'm going to keep it simple today with a little bit of dried oregano, salt, pepper. That's about it. I like to use a coarse salt, gives it a nice salty bite. Then I'm just going to put this on top of the oven, somewhere warm, and let it prove for a second time, and then we'll fire it into a nice hot oven. So you can see the dough has more than doubled in size again. So I've got the oven up to 410 degrees, and I'm going to fire these in. Now I've put a sheet tray underneath them, and I'm going to splash about a cup of water in there, and that's going to do a few things. First, it's going to help it rise, and two, it's going to make sure that it gets a really beautiful crust. All right, these look beautiful. You want to get them out of the pan and onto a rack as soon as possible. It's going to prevent the bottom from getting soggy, but you can see the nice crumb on the bottom, beautiful color, really gorgeous focaccia, and it's so simple. You can do this every day if you want.